Managing Director of Transparent RX. You should be able to see the title of this webinar from your desktop or mobile phone or notebook or tablet, however you're viewing the webinar today. I want to thank you. If you were scheduled for last month and we had to cancel and reschedule for this month. So if you planned on participating last month and you're here today, I thank you for sticking with me. And by the way, it's going to be well worth your time. I'm going to try to keep it to 35, maybe 40 minutes today. And you will get a recording sometime tomorrow morning that you can view at your leisure once we conclude the webinar today. Just a little bit about me. I've been in the industry now for 2 decades. It's tough for me to say. 2 decades. I started out with Eli Lilly, eventually started out as a drug sales rep, pharmaceutical sales rep, moved into the corporate offices. I led a market access team, and our task was to get our branded drugs. At that time, I specialized in diabetes care, Actos, Byetta, the insulins, the basal, rapid acting. That was my specialty. And we negotiated with PBMs to get our branded products onto the formulary. At that time, I just thought, hey, everyone knows what's going on. Everyone knows how the money flows. It wasn't until maybe 10 years later that I learned that that was not the case. I always wanted to have control, more control over my future and the amount of money that I make and culture and things like that. So I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I left Eli Lilly, started my own mail order pharmacy, licensed in all 50 states, and learned a lot, folks. Negotiating with PBMs, take it or leave it reimbursement deals, negotiating with drug wholesalers and generic drug manufacturers, and some of the strong arming tactics that they use when you got into these master purchasing agreements. And decided for myself at that time, I was frustrated enough that I wanted to compete with PBMs. So I said, hey, I'm going to cash out. If you can't beat them, join them. Took everything that I learned and decided to try and do it where the model worked for everyone, or mostly everyone, as best that we could, and founded Transparent RX. The country's, there's no debate about this, the country's first fiduciary model PBM. So it is in my best interest that you know what I know as much as we can in 30 to 35 minutes. I've got nothing to hide. My mantra has always been, I'm going to bust open the black box. And you're seeing that take shape today. We'll talk a little bit about that. If you have any questions for me, there's a couple ways to get those questions to me. Everyone is muted for obvious reasons. If you have questions for me, you can send those to me via chat. Or if you want the floor and you want to have a discussion for everyone to hear, which I welcome. This is all about positive results at the end of the day. We'll unmute you and you'll have the floor and you can pose a question or make a comment at that time. And so this is, for me, the webcams are distracting. I usually don't turn them on unless folks say, hey, can you turn on the webcam? But that's a picture of me, and I look the same today, and some members of our team that you see there. And so I talked a little bit about, how the industry is being bombarded with requests and demands for more transparency. You can't get away from it today. We'll talk a little bit about that. But by the end of this presentation, I'd like for 3 things to be accomplished where it pertains to you. How PBMs make money, right? I want you to know that, where that revenue comes from, but more importantly, I want you to be able to take some action, right? I want you to be able to take some action around what you learned today. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time if you don't do something different with what you learned today. The primary problem with PBMs and their relationship with their clients is price. Prices are too high. Indirectly, there's a lack of transparency. But our solution to that problem isn't necessarily negotiating bigger discounts or getting bigger rebates. That's never worked. Our solution to that problem is eliminating information asymmetry. PBMs know what buyers of PBM services want to see. They show that information during a request for proposal process or some other competitive bidding process. They show what the buyer wants to see, but then they behave differently once a group goes live. And they are able to do that because the buyer doesn't have two things. First, the information that they need to determine whether or not what the PBM, what the pharmacy benefit is costing is fair and reasonable. The second thing that most buyers, and this is the tougher pill to swallow, doesn't have is the knowledge to interpret the information that they do have. This is a prime example of information asymmetry, or in other words, information failure at play. This is not a mistake or an oversight. This is a strategy. I talked to another company out of Ohio just a few weeks ago. 2,500 employees. I'm having a conversation with the VP of Human Resources, and we're talking about the data. And somehow in the conversation, it came up, you're probably going to have trouble getting that data. Needless to say, the VP of HR didn't like what I said. What do you mean I'm going to have a problem getting that data? You're going to have, my experience tells me that you're going to have a problem getting that data. Well, the call didn't end too well. It was only a few weeks later, I got a call back saying, you're right. My broker says I can't get access to the data. It is easier to overcharge a company when that company doesn't know the extent of the overpayments that they are making. That's the reason PBMs don't want to come off the data. This is an example of information success, the opposite of information failure. A fiduciary PBM, or one at a minimum that is radically transparent, because all PBMs say that they're transparent, but one that is radically transparent will provide a receipt for the revenue, or in other words, the rebates that they collect from manufacturers and then pass on to their clients. That information is easier to come by today, but historically, it's been nearly impossible to come by, and there are still a handful of very large PBMs that are reluctant to share this information with their clients. You know why? The reason you want this level of detail, what's the point of rebates? To reduce the cost of the drug, right? Without claim level detail. And by the way, when we share this information with our clients, all of this information is populated: plan ID, field date, RX number, all that information, but we've removed it for obvious reasons today. With this information, you can start to look at the net cost of each individual claim. And when you have this information over time, you can start to look at discrepancies in the payments being received and start to ask more questions. PBMs don't like questions. This is insight number one I'm going to share with you today. This is insight number one I'm going to share with you today. So that leads me to the status quo, and this is typically what happens. A self-insured employer or a purchaser of PBM services, in other words, gets into an agreement with a PBM that calls for artificially too low PBM administrative fees. The administrative fees that are paid to a PBM for claims, electronic claims processing, providing an account manager, providing a call center, providing a member portal and a mobile app. Those are services that are usually included, formulary management, rebate contract. Those are services that are usually included in an administrative fee. The beauty of the administrative fee is that it can be audited. It's a per claim, per paid claim fee. It's a per employee per month fee. It's a per employee per member per month fee. It's something that, okay, here's how many employees we had this month. Here's the amount you agreed to pay. Is that what we paid? Yes or no? But these cash flows are hidden and much tougher to audit and verify transparency. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. So that is one source. And by the way, when that administrative fee is, let's say, below $6 per paid claim, and you can factor that out to a PPM or PMPM as well. But when it is below $6 per paid claim, it's a red flag. How is the PBM making its money then? To cover payroll, to cover benefits, to cover leases and travel. How is it making its money if that administrative fee, let's say the plan's pharmacy spend is $5 million, the PBM's administrative fee is $50,000. You think that's all the money that the PBM is going to make? No. This self-insured employer must know and have a full accounting of how much revenue the PBM itself is keeping. That is what all the fuss is about. This is a second example here. Now stay with me. And I uh, I remember this time here because this is when I worked at Eli Lilly. It was all about the small molecule brand drugs in phase 1. Phase 2, remember that mandatory mail order, and then, you know, any willing provider laws, and so the PBMs lost revenue there, but then they shifted that revenue to specialty drug rebates, and now PBMs are being squeezed there with the rebates on the pharmacy side, and now they've already shifted that lost revenue to what we call MBDCs, medical benefit drug claims. Vertical integration, at least in part, is a strategy to protect these hidden cash flows. The medical benefit drug claims have spreads too, gargantuan, and they pay rebates. Self-insured employers, unions, coalitions, health systems, many of you aren't receiving the benefit of no spreads and rebates on the medical benefit side. So listen, it sounds like I'm bashing PBMs, and that's not my intent here. The model works when we act in the interest of our clients and our patients. So my fight is for more transparency, to eliminate the hidden cash flows. Let's open up the books to our clients. Now, I'm not talking about, if you're a private PBM and you've got to show how much money, you make at the end of the year. I'm saying to each client specifically, here's what your drugs cost. Here are all the rebate dollars that we took in for those drugs that were eligible. And for this service that we're providing you, here's what we're going to charge you. For that to make sense, you've got to understand the U.S. Pharmacy reimbursement and distribution system. And so I'm going to explain this really quickly to you. Everything on the right side of your screen. PBMs, we negotiate with pharmacies to create networks in order to have sites that will dispense prescriptions to our plan participants. That's a big reason why we're hired by third-party payers and health plans, third-party payers purchase of PBM services. That's a big reason why we're hired. Now, the PSAO, the Pharmacy Services Administrative Organization, makes it easier for us to contract with pharmacies because they act as sort of a purchasing organization for independent pharmacies. So as a PBM, we contract with the PSAO. Independent pharmacies have contracted with the PSAO. So whatever contract we agree to with the PSAO, then those pharmacies accept that deal, and that's how they're reimbursed. So we don't have to go to every independent pharmacy to get into the network. We go to PSAOs for independents and some regional chains. But then for your larger chains, your Walgreens and your CVSs of the world, we go to them and negotiate individually. So now maybe you've got 10 contracts total that the PBM has to have a $60,000 or $65,000, a 60 or 65,000 pharmacies in the network. Now, we have to have clients to provide those services to. I touched on here a couple minutes ago on who those clients could be. Now, when a prescription, and this is where the hidden cash flows, really, the hidden cash flows start with the contract. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. It ain't the claims repricing. It's not the model of the PBM. It's not what the sales rep tells you. What matters the most is the contract. When we talk about transparency and getting to lowest net cost, there's no debate about that. Now, PBMs, we reimburse pharmacies, and I'm going to erase this here. PBMs, we reimburse pharmacies for the prescriptions that they dispense to our plan participants, and then we bill our clients for those services. 3 issues at hand with what I just explained. First, the inflow of cash, and I like to provide proof to whatever I say outside of my feelings or thoughts on a subject matter. I like to have proof from a third party reputable that backs up what I'm telling you. The inflow of cash in the form of manufacturer revenue, or what's oftentimes referred to as rebates or just formulary rebates, is too low when it gets to the third party payer. I'm going to show you several examples of that, why that is the case here in a second, despite if a PBM, when PBMs say, oh, we're pass through. When a PBM says that it's pass through, and that has not been addressed in the contract, what they really mean is we're passing through what we're contractually obligated to pass through. That's a big difference from we're passing through all the discounts and rebates that we've negotiated on your behalf to you. So the inflow of cash in the form of rebates that have the primary purpose of reducing costs is too low. I showed you 2 slides that touched on that already. The second problem is the outflow of cash in terms of reimbursement to the PBM for ingredient costs is too high. More about that here in a second. But the third problem, and the least obvious problem when you look at this system, is look who sits at the very top of the system. The problem is the folks that fund it, the companies that fund the entire system, know the least about how it works. That's part of the reason why PBMs have been out of control. There's been no one or very few people or organizations to say, screw you, I'm going to go somewhere else where I know exactly what I'm paying and exactly how much you're making, even if it might cost me a little bit more money. It usually doesn't. Hey, real quick, and that third problem, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second, but real quick story. Had an employee one time, this is maybe 6 or 7 years ago. We were doing a weekly lunch that we were catering, and this employee was responsible for, negotiating with the caterer, hiring the caterer, this, that. So they had responsibility. At some point, we switched caterers. Hey, we got a budget, and hey, it's fine. But come to find out, part of the reason that we switched caterers was because the second caterer paid the employee under the table to get that weekly business for us. Now, some of you may say, well, hey, good for them. What's wrong with that? Because the employee didn't pay for the catering. The company paid for the catering. And at the very least, hey, this is what's going on. What would you like to have happen? That is what PBMs do. If you're okay with that story I just shared with you and you didn't think the employee was wrong, then there's nothing wrong with what PBMs have been doing up until 2023, because it's the same thing. They're negotiating with pharmacies, they're negotiating with manufacturers with your money, and keeping and making side deals that you're unaware of with your money. So that second problem that I talked about in terms of the reimbursement to the PBM for ingredient costs being too high, the reason it's too high is because of the spreads. The spread is not a billing error. It is the PBM negotiates with the pharmacies. They negotiate with their clients on a different discount. So pharmacies get a reimbursement, and that discount is off of AWP or maybe a WAC, and that's what they get paid. The employers, on the other hand, negotiate a different discount in terms of what they pay for the drugs. That amount is higher than the amount that the PBM pays the pharmacy. The PBM keeps that difference. Now, with my tone and all that I've said up to this point, it may sound like I'm saying spreads are a bad thing in and of themselves. I'm not. What I'm saying is, and I go back to the story about the catering, what I'm saying is they're bad if the broker and the consultant and the employer are unaware of what those spreads amount to. That is bad. Now, if an employer says, hey, you can make money, we agree to allow you to make money off of spreads. We just need to know what it amounts to. And we need to, at the end of the year, to be able to say, this is okay or this is not okay. Now, and so spreads, because of the volume of generics, they more than not will happen. They happen with brands too, but more than often, when a PBM is making money off of spreads, most of that is going to come from generic drugs. Generic drugs, they have more than two prices, but the predominant prices are AWP and MAC. AWP, artificially inflated, no one pays that price. MAC is more closely related to what the drugs actually cost, but it too is higher than the acquisition cost. And for the record, there's, you're probably familiar with all the different pricing benchmarks, or some of them: AWP, MAC, NADAC, usual and customary, average sales price, average manufacturer price, direct price. There's a lot of them. That's part of what makes pharmacy so complicated. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what price benchmark is being used. What matters is the PBM keeping spreads or not? If the PBM isn't keeping spreads, then ultimately a self-insured employer or other purchaser is going to pay the same. Or if there's any difference, it won't be statistically significant difference. The differences come when the PBM is keeping a spread. So let's take a look here really quickly. And I'm going to fly through the rest because I say this every webinar, and then I go 5 or 10 minutes beyond, what I said at the onset. But let's take a look here at levothyroxine here. And I'm going to circle it. All right, so we talked about the two primary benchmarks, AWP and MAC. All right, the AWP, and these are actual AWP and prices at the time we, pull this from the back end. So this is actual AWP for Medispan, okay? And it could be different today, but what I'm sharing isn't different in how this process works. The AWP, let's call it 560. That's the AWP. Let's say that you're able to negotiate from the PBM an effective discount rate, meaning no matter what price benchmark was being used, whether it was AWP or MAC or UNC, no matter what it was being used, effectively at the end of the year, when you combine all those different price benchmarks, the discount that PBM performed off of AWP is 85%. That's what that means. And by the way, that's higher than most plans perform at when you are able to weed out and factor out the self-dealing and the reclassifications of drugs and all that sort of stuff. You know, drugs that are being excluded from the calculation that shouldn't be, right? That sort of stuff. 85% is, listen, that's nothing to be unhappy about. Is there room for improvement? Yes, but most plans are performing below that. So 85% discount means that the discount, let's call it, keep it simple here, even numbers, $475. That leaves a bill to the third-party payer of $85. That's what that means. Now, think about this for a second. The pharmacy paid $4 to get this on the shelf. $4 to get this on the shelf. What's more is that the organizations paying for the drug don't know what it costs the PBM to reimburse the pharmacy. Come on. Come on. The pharmacy, and most pharmacies, especially independents, will tell you, not so much the chains, and especially the PBMs that own chains won't say this as much. But sometimes when we get reimbursed, or a lot, we're underwater. We get reimbursed less than what we paid. Pharmacies, and listen, I'm telling you this because I owned one. It's about volume, to be able to make a living. It's about, you're not getting rich off individual claims. You need a lot of claims to be able to make payroll and to, have a house and pay for your kids' college and all that stuff. Not getting rich, off one claim, and and that's why pharmacists, they work in the pharmacy because can't afford to pay another pharmacist and just kind of manage the business. This pharmacy could be reimbursed at 100% markup, which is rare. That's the point I was trying to make. At 100% markup, and receive a $2 dispensing fee. That just, I like to tell people when I'm talking about pharmacy benefits, always preface comments with generally speaking, because there's always incidents where you'll have some one-offs. So put that phrase in front of what I'm about to say. Pharmacies aren't reimbursed at 100% markup and receive a $2 dispensing fee. But in our scenario, I just want you to see That would mean that this PBM pays this pharmacy $10. That means a $75 difference, which is a spread. Now, I'm not saying that this happens on every claim. Of course not. Does it happen on claims? Absolutely, and even higher. Doesn't have to happen on a lot of claims for a PBM to make a lot of money. When it does happen, it's usually going to happen when that generic drug isn't on the MAC list. Now, if it is on the MAC list, let's say that the MAC price is $15. The PBM's out-of-pocket cost doesn't change. It's still 10. That leaves a spread of $5. You know, if you're processing tens of thousands of claims, not just in a month on a per day, and you're averaging a $5 spread on those, that's a lot of money. The state of Ohio, this is in 2019, decided it was going to pivot. We don't want to know. Well, let me back up. Discounts off of AWP are important. Minimum rebate guarantees are important. Equally important now to us is, what are we paying you? State of Ohio, smart people, got the attorney general behind them from the state of Ohio. Unlimited resources, money's no issue. Up until 2019, they too never thought to look at and consider how much money the PBM was making. They were persuaded by the optics. The PBMs know what you want to see, what your clients want to see, and they gave it to them. Oh, we're going to increase your discount guarantees. Oh, we're going to increase your minimum rebate guarantees. The state of Ohio uncovered nearly $225 million in 1 year between these two companies in spreads. It's not It's none of my business how other companies make their money. It is my business to educate folks on that issue. And if you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. But if you're not, then I'm here to help you do something about it. $225 million just in spreads. Forget about rebates. It hadn't even gotten that far here yet. When they uncovered it, almost overnight, they terminated the contracts. And if Greg were here today and you're having a cup of coffee or a glass of scotch, my favorite is Lafroy, by the way, Lafroy 10. If you're having a cup of coffee or a glass of scotch with Greg today, he would tell you it isn't information. There it is again, information. It isn't information we've never had before. That's partly true. The larger issue is it's information you've never demanded before. It's information you never thought to evaluate before. This was a couple weeks ago. The Ohio Attorney General has sued your larger PBMs. He didn't just say we overpaid or they overcharged us. He called them modern gangsters. Not my phrase, not my phrase, modern gangsters. Think about some of the hidden cash flow tactics I've talked about. And stay with me here, folks. Just give me 5 more minutes and we're going to get out of here. I'm going to close this thing. The best part is coming. Contract language, I've talked about it. If you've got a broker or a consultant, you ask them, hey, what's the most important thing we need to address when we're trying to get to lowest net cost, when we're trying to reduce our costs? Or what's the most important thing we should consider when we're looking for transparency and getting lowest net cost in our next RFP? If you get claims repricing, you got an issue. If you get any other response other than contract, you got an issue. Again, MAC list, and I'm just touching on a couple here, just a couple. MAC lists, again, employer prices are higher than the MAC prices paid to pharmacies. That creates the spread. The pharmacy is paid with the lowest price MAC list. Why? It's money out of the PBM's bank account, and they want to hold on to a spread in there, to a margin in there. That there's a name for that. It's called differential contracting or differential pricing. When the price basis for what a PBM charges and what a PBM to a client, and then what a PBM bills, charge to a client and what a PBM reimburses to a pharmacy, that spread is allowed through differential pricing, having 2 different MAC lists, and then prices are different on those MAC lists, or differential contracting, and sometimes they're synonymous. Again, rebates, I did this, okay? Pharmaceutical manufacturers say, this is how much we're going to pay for this drug in rebates for the year. And then PBMs say, okay, we want to put 10% in this bucket, access. We want to put 25% in this bucket, market share. We want to put 65% in this bucket, administrative fee. And so when a PBM says we're pass through, what they're saying is we're passing through what we're 100% pass through, meaning we're passing through 100% of what we're contractually obligated to pass through. That's why when PBMs are sued, they oftentimes win because they understand the contract language, but their clients and brokers and consultants don't. But if they do understand and know that what's happening, then that's a whole separate conversation there. So, and again, there's more than just 3 types of rebates. If you look here, and stay with me, the administrative fee here is a manufacturer administrative fee. It's a rebate. It's not the administrative fee that I pointed out with the status quo. That's between the PBM and its client for what I talked about: electronic claims adjudication, member support, those types of things. This, to the untrained eye, could be interpreted as the same administrative fee. It isn't. It's a rebate that's been renamed an administrative fee. Why? In an effort to not be contractually obligated to pay it to a client when it isn't addressed in the contract language. The administrative fees, and by the way, this is for one drug from a relatively modestly sized specialty drug manufacturer. The administrative fee dwarfs the formulary rebate. The price protection rebate, same lawsuit. Express Scripts sued Kaleo for rebates it believed it was owed, which I do believe they were owed those rebates. Kaleo didn't want to pay. They probably assumed Express Scripts wouldn't sue to make this information public. Price protection rebates dwarf formulary rebates and administrative fees. Price protection rebates say if the manufacturer increases the price of a drug rapidly in a short period of time, then that rebate also increases, coinciding with that drug price increase. That's a price protection rebate. If it's not accounted for in the contract, guess what? PBMs keep it, increasing their profit, increasing your cost. It is no secret. Every dollar revenue is a dollar for dollar cost to the PBM's client. Outcomes rebates. PBM negotiates with the drug manufacturer, or the rebate aggregator negotiates with the drug manufacturer and says, hey, we need some value-based contracting here. If a drug doesn't work, then we need to get a refund on that drug. That's what these agreements are, negotiated between the PBM and the drug manufacturer. A refund is a rebate. Some PBMs are so bold that in their contracts, they will say, hey, outcomes or value-based arrangements or outcomes rebates, these sorts of things, these clinical programs. This is a clinical program. These sorts of things here. If we receive money from the manufacturer, we don't owe you any of it. And here more recently, and I'm tying this together, here more recently, and I like to show historical data. I just believe it's important. But I tie it into more recent data. Just so you can see how long this has been happening, and hopes that you get angry. But the state of Texas, in order for PBMs to do business in Texas, mandated you must share any revenue you take in from a pharmaceutical manufacturer. And so while all the PBMs have been, saying, hey, we're 100% pass through, we're not keeping any rebate dollars. If we do keep rebate dollars, it's minuscule, 2 or 3%. Hogwash. And so while you may say, hey, 13% isn't bad, consider the size of the organizations that are part of this. And this is public information. You can go to the Texas website and you can find it and get this yourself. But what about the 1,000 employee company? What about the 500 employee company? The PBMs could be keeping 50%. I talked about rebate aggregation. And generally speaking, all PBMs are using rebate aggregation now. It was before, your boutique PBMs, your regional PBMs like mine that would contract with a rebate aggregator. That rebate aggregator consolidated purchasing power among other PBMs, health systems, coalitions, so that we go to manufacturers together with all of our buying power that would then allow us to negotiate bigger rebates from the drug manufacturer. So the rebate aggregator represents a large pool of companies that offer pharmacy benefit services. We share with them our claims data at the end of every month, and manufacturers ask for a ton, and they're getting even more strict now on the information and more detail on what they're asking for, because they believe and it happens, they're paying rebates on drugs on claims they shouldn't be paying rebates for. So they're tightening, as the country asks for lower pharmaceutical prices, they're tightening their belts in other areas, and rebates is one of those areas. So we submit our claims data to the rebate aggregator. The rebate aggregator consolidates all of their claims data from all their different clients and then sends it, SFTP or online portal to the manufacturer. The manufacturer reconciles that claims data with the contract, and they have to send it to each manufacturer, right? They reconcile that claims data against the contract, right? And there's software involved in all of this. And then based upon that contract, the manufacturer sends back to the rebate aggregator an explanation of payments and the dollars that go with that explanation of payments. The rebate aggregator then uses its own software and then pays its individual clients with those dollars based upon our contract with the rebate aggregator. So you can't assume, and I've seen it firsthand, much larger PBMs than mine that have worse rebate deals. At the end of the day, it is about your level of sophistication around pharmacy benefits. The reason I'm sharing this, and you can go out and do your own research, that these rebate aggregators happen to be offshore. They happen to be offshore. And so now through rebate aggregation, the PBMs can say, we're going to charge, we've got this group purchasing organization, right? And the rebate aggregation falls under this group purchasing organization. So, and I talked about the squeeze on the specialty drug claims, how that pool of dollars is shrinking for PBMs. This is an effort to stall that shrinkage, that loss of revenue, by going to the manufacturers and saying, We want you to pay us what's called a GMF, a GPO management fee. We've got this GPO, and we want you to pay us to manage this GPO for the rebates you give to us and we pass on to our clients. The problem with that is those GMF or GPO management fees come from the finite dollars that manufacturers have allocated to pay for rebates. So they reduce the amount of rebates that you ultimately or your clients ultimately receive. The problem again is, hey, I don't have an issue with you gotta earn a fee. Just tell me what it is. The bottom line here is we have to understand how much money the PBM is keeping in its bank account. The importance of that is, and I haven't seen anyone talking about this yet to this level of detail, the importance of what the PBM is keeping is that it is hidden in the final cost to the plan. It's hidden in the final cost to the plan. That is the ingenious thing about opacity in pharmacy benefits. The CEO of CVS Health said this, and in layman's terms, it means we're going to make as much money as we possibly can. The amount of money that we're going to make is going to depend on how sophisticated or unsophisticated our clients might be. PBMs, when they are explaining or have been caught with their hand in the cookie jar, do not go past the first or second sentence in their explanation for why their hand is in the cookie jar without using the word contract. Just go back and look. They don't go past the first sentence without explaining why their hand was in the cookie jar without using the word contract, but their clients in a competitive bidding process, in RFP, for example, don't get to the contract until after they've already announced who they want the PBM to be. Come on. I've been at the water cooler. PBMs don't take their clients as serious people. We have a name for what the PBM keeps. Acronyms for everything, right? We call it earnings after cash disbursements. Everything in green, and then everything in green lands in the PBM's bank account. An example of a cash disbursement would be reimbursement to a pharmacy or a share of rebate dollars that are passed back. Those are dollars that leaves the PBM's bank account. Whatever is left over is the earnings after cash disbursements. With CAA now, you are better served by knowing this number, far better served than knowing and understanding what this number is at the end of every year and being able to verify that than relying on bigger discounts than at renewal. It hasn't worked. Or bigger rebates at renewal. It hasn't worked. The new path says this: hey, if I'm going to be held account to my fiduciary responsibility, then I want my vendors to be held to that same standard. If I like a vendor enough and I know enough now that I can live with radical transparency, I'll take that. But I won't accept anything less than radical transparency. And both mean that I know how much money the PBM is going to make or is making. Prime Therapeutics, way bigger than we are. Cost, 2x hours. The difference, $35 PM between these two numbers are the earnings after cash disbursements. Prime Therapeutics, remember, revenue to a PBM is a dollar for dollar cost to the PBM's client. Prime Therapeutics, the most horrible thing about this is that their earnings after cash disbursements of $35 per member per month just for the pharmacy benefit was higher than the drug's cost. This 23 includes everything: our fee, ingredient costs, net of rebates. PBMs don't want to carve out specialty pharmacy. You know why? It's revenue. It's revenue. It could lower your cost, but it will definitely lower their revenue. Listen, I'm wrapping up here. Listen, you're here for a reason. And you decided to take some sort of action around that, or thinking about taking some sort of action, right? The next stage here is actually taking action. We've got, and shameless self-promotion here, but for good reason. We've got the only pharmacy benefit certification and educational program that is backed by a major university in the world. And we're teaching it now for 8 years. You can go on the website, you can read the testimonials. We never asked for a single testimonial. It's helping people and companies improve their relationship with their PBM. That's what this is about at the end of the day. When you can sit at the table with the same level of information and the same or similar level of sophistication around pharmacy benefits, there might be some arguments and there might be some hand banging on at the table. But at the end of the day, the results are better. And that's what I mean by strengthening the relationship with your PBM. There's 3 class formats. We're backed by the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill Eshelman School of Pharmacy. I never thought that we would be big enough to take on the big 5. But I did believe we could take them on with education. And so can you. I graduated from Michigan State Business School. He pronounces it Broad, Eli Broad. Our business school is named after him. I never knew who this cat was all through college. It wasn't until I was curious enough after college to pick up his autobiography, The Art of Being Unreasonable. He believes education is the key. Who am I to argue with a man who's the only person ever to be a founder of 2 Fortune 500 companies? Sun Life Financial and KB Homes. He did that. I know nothing about cars. I like them. I know the difference between a nice one and an ugly one that runs well and one that doesn't. I can barely switch out the windshield wiper fluid. Yet, when I go in to have a vehicle repaired, I go in with my chest stuck out and my head held high, planning to speak loud to the technician. You need this done. No, I don't. This is what I need. Because I don't want to be taken to the cleaners. I don't want to seem like I'm unsophisticated when it comes to cars. I'm a grown man. I should know about cars, but I don't. I put my trust in having a reliable, honest technician, or I have to bring someone with me who knows about cars, who's an expert. If I don't have either of those two options, inevitably I'm going to end up on the side of the road. Because I'm going to decline things or services that I need, and I'm going to demand others that I didn't. When it comes to pharmacy benefits, don't be me. Be better than me. That's all my time today. I'm going to stick around for a couple minutes just in case any questions come through.